We're going to officially kick off. Again, welcome. My name is Deanna Usarski. I am part of the marketing communications team here at Insight Partners. Today, we're going to be talking about mastering monetization for B2B SaaS products. And this has been a highly requested topic from our registrants from past sessions. So really excited to be bringing this to you guys today. This is part of our ScaleUp CEO series, and this is where we bring in leaders from our centers of excellence. Today we have Rachel and Jorge, and they share the same advice and guidance that they're giving the hundreds of founders that are in our portfolio. So that's some really good topic, some really good points to go over today. Before we officially begin, I have a few housekeeping things. So first is that the session is going to be recorded. So if you want to rewatch a part or you want to share this with someone, we'll send that to you within the next few days. If you have any questions, submit them in the Q&A box. We received a ton of questions from you guys already, and we've woven that into the conversation today. So hopefully we'll be able to address a lot of those that you submitted in advance. And then we would love if you can take the quick survey at the end. That's the reason we're bringing this session to you today. So please share your feedback. We really appreciate hearing from you all. So with that, I am going to pass it to Rachel.
Hello, everyone. We are very excited to be talking with you today. I'm actually going to have Jorge introduce himself first.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for making the time to be with us today. I'm Jorge Rosales. I am with the on-site team, and I work with our company's monetization strategy, which basically covers everything from go-to-market all the way to pricing and packaging strategy. And I've been doing this for the last 8 years in consulting and in private equity. And good to be with you all today.
Thanks, Jorge. And I'm Rachel Weston Rowell, on the same team as Jorge here at Insight in our on-site team. I work with our companies a lot on product strategy, how to build great product and engineering organizations, how to lead effectively at scale. I'm really excited to partner with Jorge on this topic today. So let's jump in. Maybe, there we go. So if you aren't familiar with Insight, some of you may not be, we've been investing in software companies for over 25 years now. We're partners with about 800, actually more than 800 really transformative software companies. Our mission here is to find, fund, and work successfully with executives and provide them with practical, very hands-on software expertise, all the way from that very first investment to IPO. One of the ways we do that is through our on-site team, which you heard Jorge and I mention that we're part of. On-site is made up of over 140 operators who work really closely with the portfolio to provide guidance on different areas of expertise, from marketing to sales to talent, and of course, product and engineering and pricing. Our particular center of excellence, product and tech, works with portfolio companies across a wide range of activities. And we're really here to help them ensure that they're building the right products for the right markets at the right times, and that they're able to scale effectively and efficiently, and that they can monetize their products in order to drive revenue. So we're going to jump into what we're going to cover today, and I'm going to hand it over to Jorge.
Thanks, Rachel. So today we have 3 key things that we wanted to touch with you today, in this webinar. We're going to start with Monetization 101 on what are those building blocks of a successful monetization strategy. Now, there are 4 that we'll go in detail with each of them. And each of them have implications around not just your pricing and packaging, but your entire go-to-market and corporate strategy as well. Second one is monetization goals as you scale. As you start building more, creating more, going up market, adding new products and features, your strategy should evolve as well. It's going to become more complex in some cases. And we have here some ideas on what you have to take into account as you go into that journey. And number 3, from our work with more than 800 companies, what are some of the typical mistakes and lessons that we have seen that basically companies make as they, again, think about their monetization strategy, and that can hurt their growth. All right, so number 1, what are those building blocks for a successful monetization strategy? Let's start with the first one. As I said, we have 4 of them. The first one is that any company that is best in class around this topic is align. Basically, the ability to effectively monetize, say, the new innovations that you have or new products that you're going to be developing and expand, and by that we'll talk about what expand means in our vocabulary as well, is critical to scale our SaaS businesses. This means that monetization should be an executive level topic, not just an afterthought or something that people 3 levels below the executive team are thinking about. So what does this mean as an example? What we have seen is that these best-in-class companies make it super high priority for their executive team at a C level in some cases, or CEO levels are in some cases, and look at it very holistically. We typically showcase what does pricing mean. A lot of people have asked us, what does pricing mean? The short answer is pricing is equal to the value your product or your solution or your company is delivering to the customers. And that is the intersection from 3 main areas: marketing, sales and customer success, and product. And now, one of the questions that we have received was, how do we know we have the right monetization strategy? You can take a look at the questions that are surrounding these diagrams, because those are the typical questions that we ask our companies when we work with them to ensure that they have the right model that is aligned with their goals, with their strategy, with their go-to-market model, and so on. For instance, or some of the most critical ones, is my messaging aligned to what customers and prospects perceive is my product delivers, or the value that it delivers? That is something that is as important as for pricing or product as it is for product marketing, as it is for sales. Because if you don't have a consistent messaging between what your marketing team is putting outside in their campaigns and what your sales team is saying to prospects when they talk to them, and what your product actually is doing, you're not going to be able to fully capture the value that your solution is offering to them. Another common question, and not that the other words are not important, but another common question is the sales team and CS team's structure in a way that is aligned with the company's overall product strategy? For instance, in some cases, we have seen that companies want to be landing and expanding, yet the incentives are not allowing for that motion over time. Similarly, or closely to that, you have, is the company sales motion, for example, land and expand, aligned to the product strategy? A lot of companies come to us and say, we have a land and expand motion, yet when you take a look at how their sales and CS teams are composed, how the product configuration is, it's actually not super clear how they can expand over time, because there are no incentives to do that, or the product doesn't allow for it. So again, these questions and these topics should be something discussed at a C-level, to make sure that everybody and every unit in the org is aligned on.
I like that, Jorge. And I think it's additionally complicated as companies grow and scale and become more complex. When I work with early stage companies, we talk about how the Venn diagram of the product strategy and then the strategy for the business as a whole are almost completely overlapping, really. It's more of a circle than a Venn diagram, because we're all very focused on ensuring that the first product we have is wildly successful in the market, right? Like achieving and then iterating on product market fit. But as companies become successful and grow, it really does become a Venn diagram, and where product is heading with the product strategy is just a piece of the bigger business strategy, which intersects with marketing, sales, et cetera. And so as those things potentially start to become less completely overlapped, it's even more important that we have a cross-functional executive level conversation about these topics.
Exactly. And then also to add to that, the other thing that I'll say is that, for example, if you are more like SMB focused, it is better to have alignment on achieving activation of your solution, making sure that people are getting it and using it so that this becomes a stick. Whereas if you are much more focused on enterprise, the play is much more related to trying to get expansion levers over time. So again, this is something that has a lot of implications, but that's why it's important to ensure that it's aligned at executive level. So jumping to the second building block that we have is based on segmentation. Our customers, all of us, have different product needs and willingness to pay. Hence, we have to design our monetization strategy around those target segments. Now, before we go to the next slide, what this means to some extent is that there are companies that don't have a clear alignment into what is my target segment. They want to go from down market to up market, from 20 different verticals, from 20 different use cases. That's going to happen over time as you scale. But initially, especially if you are much smaller, you should be able to design your strategy on how to monetize your product around those target segments and be much more pointed around that. I'm not saying just pick one segment, but I'm saying that you should be able to clearly define how you're going to tackle different segments, not that many, preferably, with your packaging, for example. So if we go to the next slide, and that's an example around how to use packaging to target different segments. So two key things from this one, and explain to you what this means. Number one is that you should focus on the feature needs and jobs to be done to design your pricing segmentation. And the second one, that customers should be able to identify the package that best suits their needs and willingness to pay. How do you do that, tactically speaking? Imagine that you have three different segments, and imagine that you have three different use cases, and each, basically the three different segments are defined by the use case that they have for your product. You should be able to articulate what are those different features that are critical for those different segments based on how they're going to use it, and which are the ones that are not so critical that you can basically deprioritize for them. If you're able to do that, and this is a good, better, best example, you can also do this by a platform plus modules model or other strawmans that we have. But basically the message here is that you should be able to identify those different needs, how they use your product, how they value each feature, so that you can then package your product in a way that speaks the same language that each of the different segments wants to hear. So that's, again, why when we think about monetization and segmentation, they go hand in hand together with how you configure your product and your packaging.
And I think it's important here to call out too, that this is not something that happens downstream from product roadmaps and backlog prioritization. We should be thinking about who the segments are that will use the things we're building right from the start. Because if we aren't, then when it gets time to think about, well, how are we going to monetize this? There's a lot of backtracking that has to be done and rethinking that has to be done about, oh gosh, well, when we decided to pursue this feature or this element of the product, we didn't really think about who it was for, which is definitely a pattern that we see.
Exactly. And we'll talk also a lot more around that, because that's one of the things that we have seen some companies, certain companies do. So if we go to the next building block, number 3. A successful monetization strategy should enable you to land and expand. Now, you should be able to define how your customers will start, land, and grow with you. Hence, your packaging and the way you structure your monetization strategy and align the incentives should make it easy to get started. And then you should be able to, it should allow you to identify the right metric and packaging that will drive that expansion. And we'll explain in more detail in the next slide. So what does it mean that this monetization thing should allow you to land and expand? You can see here on the left-hand side, a strawman around one product that has 2 different flavors of it. And then you have 4 different add-ons in the bottom. When we talk about having clear expansion motions and clear landing entry points, we talk about 1, having the right value metric to growth. So for example, user or usage. That primary driver of expansion revenue is the primary driver of expansion for SaaS businesses. That metric should allow you to scale alongside, should allow you to scale as you grow with the value you're delivering to your customers. It should be easy to measure. It should be easy to forecast. It should be linked to growth over time. That metric is, especially as you start, super critical to make sure that you pick the right metric that speaks the same language as your customer, that you can showcase how much value you're delivering attached to that metric is crucial. So again, I will speak in a few slides around how your strategy should change as you become more sophisticated, but that is the first thing that you have to take into account. We have seen many, many companies that basically use a metric that doesn't allow them to expand. In one example, a company that I advised in the past, which was from the salons spa industry. Basically, if you look at that market doesn't have a lot of expansion by number of users. A salon is going to have 10 seats, give it or take, throughout the year or throughout the many years, unless you have a massive or unless you're upmarket, but this was more SMB. In that particular case, you cannot expand too easily from the metric perspective. Yet, even worse, they were basically giving away 20 seats upfront at X dollars. So in that case, one thing that we did with them was to change that metric to make it much more granular, to make it much more like in bundles of 5, so that they could expand over time. And if a salon that started with 2 seats wanted to then grow to 5 or to 10, they could have some expansion. And also if salons that had 10 users, they would not just have 20 users from the get-go. So that's one thing around volumetric growth. The second one is around package growth. Again, and you can see here the lines that are there. Those are meant to represent features. You should have the ability to expand or go to drive expansion based on how sophisticated your customers are going to become. Initially, a customer may just need the basic stuff, the basic things, the bare bones, the table stakes features. But if you think correctly around how to package your solution, you should be able to give them an expansion motion over time, because now you're going to give them a much more robust or sophisticated product that they can opt in and move up market over time, or expand over time, sorry. That is the second thing, and why land and expand is important, and why you can think of it in multiple dimensions. Number 3, which is new product growth. Again, and coming back to Rachel's point from before, thinking about what is the ROI of that new product that you are developing, that you're investing all this time and money, how are you going to use it in your monetization strategy? You know, best-in-class companies spend the time before spending the money to understand, how am I going to monetize this? For which segment is it going to be? Is it something that I just created because I found it to be cool? Or is it something that I created because the market has a clear need that I can support? So again, that other expansion dimension is readily available for you, but you have to think carefully about how to use it. And before, again, starting to develop stuff, think about how you're going to go to market with it. Finally, number 4, add-ons, which are ancillary offerings to capture value. That is another expansion motion. And we'll talk in the pitfalls a bit about this, but you can think of this in some cases as certain features that you may be developing right now that you're going to anyways bundle as part of your core product or solution. Guess what? In some of those cases, those could be very powerful expansion levers for your product and solution. So thinking about this is how best-in-class companies think about monetization strategy, how they can expand the different motions, how the different dimensions, and how, if you tie this together with your incentives for go-to-market, how this ties to those incentives and how I structure my team of salespeople from hunters to farmers, and how is their incentives and so on and so forth.
What's critical here as well is that the product be able to support the monetization strategy. So it's really important that upfront, as we're having these conversations, because, you know, as Jorge said, think about how you're going to get the money before you spend the money, right? Like, you want to be thinking about, from a product perspective, are we designing this in a way and building it in a way that's going to allow us to have flexibility to potentially have different value metrics, to have different packages, to sell some new features as add-ons if they prove to be financially viable in those ways, right? If we lock ourselves in with the product design and keep ourselves from having flexibility around monetization, it can be a real problem down the road as we learn and explore different monetization paths, because they then may require us to go back and re-architect or rebuild parts of the product in order to support the monetization strategy, which is just adding more cost to the thing that we already built.
Exactly. So moving to the 4th building block, a successful monetization strategy is based on your value prop. You have to be aware of how your other players in the market are pricing and positioning their products, but you don't just have to copy. The reason why you have built something is because that something is going to cover a need in the market, is going to become something great, or is something great already. Hence, you should be clear around what is a differentiated value prop, because that is going to be the main thing. And coming back to that initial slide that I showed you about those 3 diagrams, that is going to be a key driver of how much willingness to pay you can capture and what is the positioning that you should be having for your solution. So if you go to the next slide, here you can see a basic diagram. You know, it's a price to value map. Effectively, what this means on the left-hand side is that your price should always be in that corridor that is vertical corridor, diagonal corridor. Your price should always be to the value you are delivering, aligned to that value. Now, when we talk about that you should understand what is that competitive positioning, is because you should be able to define and understand what you do better than others. And more importantly, if that is stuff that you are doing better than others is critical for your customers, for the market. If the answer is that it's something that is extremely critical and you're performing so much better than the rest, then certainly you should be able to actually command a premium over your competitors in the market, because you have a better performance, because you have a better uptime, because you have more features that are critical for doing certain businesses. You should have that, and you should be clear around that constantly, because again, this changes very rapidly in these days. Now, again, best-in-class companies have this and keep this in the back of their heads and are constantly updating these views so that they are clear around what is the messaging that they have to highlight, what is the price level that they have to put in place, what are the campaigns that they have to actually launch to drive adoption or expansion, and so on and so forth. Okay. So those were the 4 building blocks that we discussed in this section. So we have tried here to capture some of the questions that you had asked in the work in the invite that we sent over for this webinar, and we have captured 3 here that we feel represent a majority of them. Apologies if we haven't covered your specific question. There were quite a few, but hopefully also we have within some of them as part of this presentation. So the first question that we had here was, how do you know you have the right pricing strategy in place? So we take a look at a few things here. One thing, for example, for early stage companies is that your win rate and discount numbers are basically how are they performing, right? Effectively, what we mean or what we say by that is that we want to see that discount for same segments or similar deals is not just all over the place. If you are seeing that there is a consistent price that you are landing for a similar product in a similar segment, and there is not a much deviation between deals, you're in the right path. However, if you see that it's all over the place, we're not saying that it's because of a wrong pricing strategy. It may be the case, or it may be that you are actually trying to target different segments within the same one, and then you have to recalculate that or recalibrate that. But that is, in general, if you are able to command similar prices for same segments and similar deals, you're in the right path. Second one is with regards to win rates. Again, if your win rate is decent, you are actually having consistency there. You are in the right path with regards to your monetization strategy. Second, another thing that, from a customer perspective is if your pricing strategy is actually causing meaningful friction on new deals or renewals, because, for example, they don't understand it. They don't understand what is the value coming from. They don't understand what is the usage. They don't understand how you're charging for your solution. Then probably you should take a look at it and see how you want to adjust it. Your customers or your prospects should not love your pricing, but they should not be confused about it. That's the key point there. And the third one is if you have different tiers, like a good, better, best, that you have a good distribution or attach rate for those 3. If you are seeing that 90% of your deals are just being closed on the good or the entry-level package, and you are not able to close anything in the other 2, probably you are giving away too much stuff on that entry-level package. You should reconsider your monetization strategy there. Similarly, if they are just basically selling everything on the premium one, and by the way, no one is asking for a discount, maybe you are actually leaving money on the table there as well. And then the other one would be, and as you become more sophisticated, if your target market, target segment are very used to paying, for example, for implementation fees for their other providers, and you are one of the critical ones, if you are able to also command charge decent rates for implementation, you're doing a great job. Again, we are SaaS, and typically we will always take the SaaS part, the recurring revenue over implementation. But in general, if you have a right pricing strategy and packaging strategy, you should be able to at least capture some of that implementation fees upfront. Second question, how to price effectively for a land and expand strategy. We have discussed this at length in the previous slides. You should be able to target different customer use cases. Your packages should have a decent level of flexibility to actually allow your customers to evaluate trade-offs between the packages by themselves. Again, this is more also in some cases led to a PLG. But then the other thing that we discussed before is that as you start developing new features, as you start developing new products, don't just think about putting it for free included in your current solution without charging extra for it. Take the time to understand whether or not you are actually able to expand using it and create a new feature, a new tier, and drive expansion through that as well. And then finally, for the SMB space, when does a free initial or entry product pricing strategy like that used by HubSpot works best? It depends. It depends on your product. It depends on your users. In general, you should consider giving a freemium offering if you basically have the user is aligned with the decision maker as well. That typically is the case once you have when you are in the SMB space. However, as you go more up market, typically what we have seen is that decision makers are actually different than the users. So in some cases, it's not going to make a ton of sense to give it away for free because the user is going to use it. They are going to love it. They may want to buy it for themselves, but if you want to go up market, then you will have to then rechange your strategy as well.
Jorge, we had one question as you were talking about implementation. The question was, what kind of rates are you seeing for professional services as part of implementation? I wonder if you can speak a little bit about how to think about what to charge here.
Yeah, there are a few dimensions that define how much you should be charging for professional services or for implementation fees. Complexity of the implementation, and that could be defined by the number of hours spent, but also for how complex or how unique that integration that you have is, for example. If it's more complex and unique to you, you should be able to charge more for it. If it's going to take more time, you're going to have more hours as well to include in there. That is one thing. Secondly is how much work it requires from you versus from your customer. If the implementation is effectively easy on your side, but it requires much more work from your customer. And that is why in some cases you have like a lot of customers that have failed to launch. Then it's not too much about the implementation or charging for it. It's actually making incentives so that your customers implement faster. And an incentive that you could use, for example, is I'm going to give you 50% discount on implementation fees if you implement in the next 3 weeks. That gives them some sort of like urgency. In terms of benchmarks on a per hour basis, depending on where in the market in which you are and how unique your solution is, we have seen companies charging from $100 per hour to 150 to 250, but that's more like super high end solutions per hour. Again, you have to make the balance, and if by doing the math, then you also define or understand that the implementation that you should be charging based on those numbers, on the hours and whatnot, it is going to be 2x the subscription fee, then there's a trade-off that you have to make there because you don't really want to have that. It's gonna, slow down sales velocity, is going to slow down adoption, usage, and you don't want that. So that's like at a high level how you could think about it. All right. So moving on to the second topic we had here today. How should your monetization strategy evolve as your company scales? Now, as we said before, This is going to change, and what you should focus on is going to vary depending on which stage you are. At a high level, you can use this framework to guide that how you should think about it. So, for example, if you're pre-product market fit, typically the founders are the owners of that monetization strategy for the company. And what should they be focusing on? They should be focusing on identifying that monetization metric, what we discussed before. What is that metric that is tied to the value that my solution is giving? Now, there are, and something that came in one of the questions was, should we then just copy what others in the industry are doing, or should we come up with something brand new and out of the box for that metric to monetize? If you are in an industry that you have a lot of companies and big players, and the market is super trained to think on traditional metrics like per user, per user, per user, you have to then spend the time to understand whether or not it's worth trying to change that metric. If it's going to be an easy battle. If the answer is no, probably you're going to be fine just using the same metric as they have. And then over time, trying to add dimensions to your metrics to expand using something more creative. That said, if you understand that this is a pain point in that industry, that companies are not, are looking for something new that is aligned to value, and you can change or you can charge that metric and companies are willing to go with you in that direction, then certainly that metric could be something that is not commonly used by others in this space. The second goal that you should have as part of in this stage is with regards to understanding your core value prop and rough price sensitivity. Value prop, as we said before, that is key, that is critical. And something that we have seen is that a lot of companies have their pitch around what is a value prop. You have to use that pitch not too much as if you were talking to an investor, but you have to take the time to talk to your customers and the market to understand whether or not that pitch, that value prop is actually what they want to hear and if they see the value from your solution. So it's two different audiences, and what they care about is different as well. And that is critical because once again, as we said before, making sure that you speak the right language, that you highlight the right things for your prospects and your customers, what they care about, is key to be able to capture willingness to pay. And the rough price sensitivity. By that, we mean is that, fortunately, in some cases, you have a space to do A/B testing, or you have to do a space to do testing with different new logo deals that are coming or large ones if you have a more opaque structure that you don't publish your prices, for instance. That is something that you should be testing over time, and you should be spending time to understand, all right, I just sold this deal at 100,000 for this segment, for this product. They actually didn't complain too much about the price. Let's test 150 next time. Next time 150. So that way you can start assessing whether or not in that particular segment or different segments, people are paying differently for your solution. As you get more into early PM product market fit, similarly, the owner is going to be the founders in some cases, but now product. In this case, your goal should be to introduce tiered packaging. That's one example, right? Good, better, best, for instance, to balance adoption and drive price differentiation. And this is related to what we said before. You have different flavors for different segments of the market, and people can understand clearly what is the value of each of them. Secondly, you should be able to start testing higher price levels to understand that pricing headroom. Don't be scared. You should be able to do this with some deals. Start testing more aggressive prices. You started at 100, no one said anything. 150, you closed. Why don't we test 200? Start testing, pushing the boundaries. You have more case studies. You can showcase and demonstrate the ROI of your solution to them. You should be able to then start charging higher prices there. Then finally, as you are in the growth stage, who is the owner? Typically is product or product marketing or BSops. Now here, you can start thinking about your monetization metric and changing it to ensure that it's actually driving sufficient expansion. Again, you may have started with, I'm going to just start with 100 users as part of this deal. That is fine. Now you have data points that you are able to capture how much actually you are using your solution. You should be able to, at that point, start saying, Well, let's make an adjustment. Let's start at 50 for my entry level and then 75 and I want 50 and so on, so that you can drive expansion there, or changing the metric as we said before. And then second goal here is that introducing new products and features into the existing packaging and avoid charging for every new release. We'll see in the pitfalls in the next slides, but companies either release everything and give it away for free, or release everything and don't charge, and try to charge for everything. You have to find that balance there. And that is something that takes time and iterations as well. And then finally, the final goal here would be to gradually increase price levels to match solution growth. And that could be both on installed base. You have closed deals that were 5 years old at $100 or 100,000, and now you are able to charge 200,000. You have demonstrated ROI. You should be able to get them over time to what your actual list price should be. And similarly, your list prices should all start going up based on the ROI of your solution and based on the willingness to pay from the market.
And I think across all of these stages, it's important to make sure that monetization is part of the conversation. We see in these earlier stage environments where we're still trying to find product market fit, all the way into growth where we're doing innovation work, a tendency to ask customers, ask prospects, ask the market, like, do you like our new good idea? Without also trying to understand willingness to pay, right? And so like, you can have a lot of prospects love your really cool idea, but if they want it for free, you're going to have to rethink what your approach is going to be to bring that to market. And so making sure that, again, like we're going to be a little broken record here, but the monetization conversation needs to be upfront and part of the product strategy and product evolution conversation, and not an afterthought that we then have to bolt on afterwards.
Yeah. All right. So we'll answer the questions that we just got in here in a bit. But there are 3 compelling events that should lead you to revise your monetization strategy. Number 1, and this shouldn't be news by now, based on everything that we have said, introducing new product. In some cases, businesses sell each new feature release a la carte, and that results in low attach rates and lower revenue as well. But also in some other cases, basically they just bundle them together, put them into the packages, and they don't raise prices just because we are nice, because we want to give away more stuff. We feel that we have not done enough for our customers. That is why it's important to understand that perception of value from them. In this case, you should evaluate how you can bundle in the features or limit access to features and monetize through annual increases. Again, customers buy solutions, not features. That is why it's also very important that product, marketing, sales, everybody speaks. There was a board member in a company that I work with. They used to call the company, like the sales team, it was like more of a feature function lingo. And basically it was just, I have that feature, I have that one. That type of thing you want to avoid. You want to make sure that you understand what is the role of that new feature or new product into the entire go-to-market strategy, and how you're going to monetize and how you're going to bundle it together, how you're going to drive expansion. Second one is moving up market. Here, basically, as you start to go up market, you're going to have to change quite a few things, not just on the product, on your go-to-market strategy, on how you speak about your solution, what you highlight, how you structure your sales team. But basically, you have to ensure that it's clear what is that breaking point between what you currently offer and what you're going to offer to the bigger guys. You are basically going to have to be smart around what you're going to include in those higher tiers that is not already part of the in the enterprise tier that is not already part of the higher tiers, so that you can drive that adoption for that. Yeah, that is kind of like in the crux of the second point here. If we go to the third one, churn issue. Now, before you blame that it is on pricing, you have to understand that what is the reason for that churn. in general, we're seeing that a lot of overselling and poor activation are some of the root causes that lead to low value realization. That could or could not be from a pricing standpoint. It could just be from a sales or CS standpoint as well. But what we would say here is that after you have understood why is that root cause, what is happening, what is churn spiking, and you understand that it's actually related to the product or to your pricing, maybe there are different ways that you can use your packaging to try to prevent that churn. It's only here, but for instance, what you could do is start moving people to entry packages, because maybe the stuff that they are, that they bought initially is much more sophisticated than what they needed. Hence, you can start taking them down market. Or you can also, and that's more like on terms and conditions, you can try to adjust contract durations. Basically you tell them, hey, you pay me for 12 months, I'm going to give you 15 months, or in different ways. But again, if you're seeing a spike in churn, take the time, understand why is that happening? Is it a product performance? Is it a pricing? Is it that it's too expensive for the value that you are giving them? Is it too expensive because you gave away too much stuff initially? Is it because there are features that they don't use? And then make a decision based on that. All right. We had 2 questions from you in this part. First one, are there inflection points or metrics we should be looking at to help us know when to adjust and evolve our monetization strategy? The first one, on the inflection point, would be moving from a single product to a multi-product is probably the biggest one. As you go from 1 to 2 or 3 more, that is where you have to understand, and that is where the ROI of R&D starts to really matter. Again, before you spend the money, understand how you're going to be getting the money in the future, where you're going to sell it, how, to whom, in which motion are you going to be using it. The second one is, again, moving up market. It's just a lot of companies that are starting in SMB, and when they try to go up market with the same solution, have a hard time because they don't understand fully what is that, what is the stuff that the big guys care about? What is the stuff that they should be bundling together? What is the other stuff that they can be using to differentiate themselves from their solution? And also, in some cases, that more bigger customers are used to certain things, such as paying for implementation or paying for the solution 3 times what you are used to charging, that, if you go to your current packaging, to your current model, with your current monetization strategy and levels, they may feel that you're actually not that great. So again, as you try to go on market, think about how you want to do it. Metrics, NRR probably, and then the other one would be seeing high discount rates for similar deals in the same segment. Second question, what is the optimum way to balance early customer deals that doesn't set a precedent for future price lists or structures? So, as we said before, you should not be afraid of experimenting with higher prices as new deals come your way. As a rule of thumb, if your customers are not asking for a discount, you are for sure underpriced. You should be closing deals with a 15, 20% discount, larger ones for the most part. That is telling you that, that is kind of like at that threshold, that is that level. If you start closing deals and there's no discount expecting from them for your prices that you have put in front of them, probably you are giving away too much stuff for free. Second one is making sure that you are clear around the ROI of your solution. Large enterprises thinking this, or customers in general, think about ROI of my solution, my investment, as we all should, including as we develop new stuff. You should be able to identify how much your solution is going to get your customer, how much revenue, how much savings, and you should always try to anchor your prices tied to that. As a rule of thumb, again, if you are able to capture 25% of that ROI that you are helping them generate, you are pricing it in the right way. And then finally, try to start pricing at a higher price point for all other deals. All right, let me see the question that we have here.
Yeah, we have two questions. One got put in the chat, then one in the QA. So the one from the QA was, would you advise using the Van Westendorp model at the end of a landing page to reveal the pricing page?
We can discuss this one offline, but Van Westendorp is a interesting methodology, but also has a lot of flaws. So I'm not sure if I would try to use that one into a landing page. I would certainly try to use some of that as part of an experiment, if you will, for certain customers or through A/B testing, but not probably as part of a landing page.
And one more before we jump into talking about pitfalls and mistakes. Can you talk a little bit about open source, freemium, heading into 2024, how we're thinking about this world?
Yeah, so open source, we can have a conversation for hours on that one, because that is one that requires a lot of time. In terms of freemium, I think that it's still valid, what we said before, in next year, especially as you want to drive adoption of your solutions. Freemium models or free trials will work typically if you have a product that has you don't need to implement or customize stuff. That the one that uses it as a free, like a freemium type of thing, is the one that have the decision to buy it as well at the end of the freemium. Or if you are discussing about freemium stuff in general, or like freemium that, a free tier forever and ever, just thinking about whether or not you are driving conversion of that to paid solutions in a meaningful way is something that I would encourage people to think in next year. Mainly because there are so many companies that have a freemium model, but their ability to convert them into paid tiers is very hard. If that is the case, then probably you're giving away too much stuff in that freemium model, and you want to start being a bit more structured in how to, take some stuff out of it, put it in the paid models. And I'm not saying, charge, crazy figures to as you drive an option. You can start by putting an interim, tier that bridges that gap between freemium and paid. But that's something that I think for next year, companies should be considering as well.
Let's move on to the pitfalls, and if we have a little time at the end, we can touch lightly on the giant topic that is open source.
Yeah. All right. What are some of the typical mistakes founders make that can stifle growth? We have here, again, we have worked with so many companies that it's a very good thing, and we have had some great learning experiences from them. There are 8 that we have selected for today. Number 1 is that packages lack clear value propositions. You are focusing on the features, you're focusing on the functions, you are focusing just on what you have and basically saying, oh, and I have the same as these other 4 players. As we said earlier, companies buy solutions, they don't buy the features. Again, depending on who your buyer persona is as well, you may want to make sure that you have those features and understanding and the performance on those if it's a very technical buyer. But in general, if you're talking to business, they will not care too much around that. They will care around your value prop and messaging. So each package offer should be tailored to a job to be done and the maturity level. Second one is packages don't have a role in land and expand. You just started creating stuff. You start creating features, products, and you don't know how you're going to use them to drive expansion over time. That's the second most critical pitfall that we have seen. You basically develop stuff because you thought it was cool, because you thought that it was a need in the market, but you didn't test it. That is key here. Understanding what is the role of the different packages, the different tiers, the different add-ons to drive that expansion, or different products to drive that cross-selling motion is critical. And by the way, speaking of 2024 and the last one, again, we are in a recession probably, or the market is not in the greatest condition. There's going to be probably a lot of more eyes around the making smart investments into your R&D. So this is why it's important to spend the time to understand what is the role of your package and how you're going to monetize it. Third one is price is too low. if you're selling and you don't get any pushback from people, start asking for higher prices in the next deals that come your way, until you start getting people asking for 20, 25, 30% discounts. That is, at a psychological level, a threshold that people have in their heads when they're asking for a discount, if the price is too high. Next one is no annual price increases. Historically, as we all know, we had, in the last 4 years, we have had extreme inflation, unusual inflation, and a lot of companies were not able to monetize on that. Married to that, we had also a lot of salary and wages inflation, and your margins were actually collapsing. Two things here. A, ensuring that your terms and conditions and your MSAs have clear COLA adjustments, cost of living adjustments, or like annual escalators is critical so that you can have that possibility. And B, executing on those. There are certain segments where the customers are trained to think about increases and that they're going to come every year, no matter what. So you have to leverage that as well, because if that segment of the market is thinking in those terms and knows that all of their other providers, I'm not saying your competitors, but other providers are actually executing those increases, they're going to expect the same from you as well. Fifth one, we have discussed that at length. The price metric doesn't scale. There's this whole debate around, should we just charge for usage? Should we just change? It's not as simple of consumption model. It's not as simple as just moving in that direction. Yes, if you everybody wants to charge like AWS for sure, but no one likes to pay those type of models. So just there's this balance that you have to take into account. But ensuring that your metric is scalable and that is aligned to value delivery is critical here. Charge or not charge for every new release. Evaluate whether or not you should bundle them as part of your product, if it makes sense, if it's just a gap that you're going to be covering for your product performance, or if it's actually something that you should be charging as an add-on or putting as part of a separate product to drive cross-selling or a different tier.
Yeah, a quick comment on this. I feel like as our capabilities to deliver rapidly and easily new features and new products to customers has increased over the past decade and more, we've actually gotten a little sloppy here about just because you can release it doesn't mean you should, right? And if we're not thinking about monetization, we're just giving away potential revenue, leaving money on the table.
Exactly. Number 4, not charging for implementation. This is B2B. As I mentioned before, in certain segments of that market, companies are more than happy to pay for implementation. I remember one company that I worked with in the past, they were very reluctant to charge for implementation. They wanted to charge, let's say, $2,000, and their recurring revenue was like $10,000. And I was like, well, but you're in this space. In this space, your customers are paying a full year of subscription also on top of that for implementation, without even more. And they were like, no, we feel that it's gonna like hurt our adoption and sales velocity. We went to market, did some research. Basically, my hypothesis was, we can charge for implementation up to $10,000, like one-on-one, for what you're charging for recurring. Talked to a bunch of people from different segments. They all were willing to pay. They were like, yeah, I would pay even more. I know that the amount of work that this entails is huge. And I know that this is going to, it takes a ton of time and people, and it's going to be, distraction if I do it myself. I'm willing to pay all of that. So we went to market with that, and they were charging for it. And it was another revenue stream for the company. Not only that, I'll say that also not charging for implementation or charging for it and using it as a negotiation lever is crucial in some cases, because now you have that you can give away as a discount or give away for free if you're able to convince people not to discount on the subscription side. And then finally, lack of customer insights. Customer research is as important to monetization strategy as it is to your product. You have to do it. You have to spend the time talking to companies, to customers, to understand their perceptions on your value and so on.
So given that we've got just a few minutes left, Jorge, I think maybe we can tackle a couple, there's two more questions that people submitted and call that a good place to land. So one was, is there a strategy to move from freemium to fully paid model? So you were talking before about like the freemium model and how you can get kind of stuck.
I think that the first one would be, it has to be done by company, but in general, one of the things that I would say is take a look at your usage for different features of your freemium tier. See what are those features that are used the most and by whom, and start seeing if you can fence the usage of those to drive that to the paid conversion. So for instance, if you have 4 features, number 1 is used 100 times every month for that user, see if you're limiting it to 50 and then starting a new tier, paid tier that only has like a 50 usage cap allows you to convert in that way. I think that that's the first thing that I would do. Take a look at that usage. And then secondly, also take a look at if there's any way to bridge that gap between those two.
And then I think last question was, what's your take on having high list prices and high discounts for B2B enterprise? So having a 30 to 40% premium on top of the list price to be able to give the same in discount. It seems like procurement might feel like they're getting a win in negotiation.
That is a tactic that is a tactic that we have seen executed a few times. Of course, you know, in general, in some cases, we advise our companies to try to go and talk to the business and move away from the procurement conversation, because as they correctly pointed out, they are measured by the discount that they can get from that vendor. So, but in absence of that, and if you really have to just go and negotiate with vendors, with procurement, yes, having a 25 to 30% premium on top, as long as it's not going to put you out of the market compared to other solutions, is something that you could consider to do.
And with that, I think we've come to the top of the hour. This is such a great topic, and I'm so glad, Jorge, that you were able to talk with the portfolio companies and the broader audience about how Insight supports on this.
Thanks, everyone.
Deanna, did you want to add anything before we wrap up?
Yeah, I just want to say a quick thank you to everyone for joining. And thank you so much to Rachel and to Jorge for this amazing presentation. Just a quick reminder, this was recorded, so keep your eye on your inbox when you'll receive it within the next few days. And we really appreciate if you can take that survey at the end. Thank you, everyone, and we hope to see you on a future session.